Moving on, conflict in Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank, as Israeli troops force settlers to evacuate from the illegal outpost of Homesh. Tenants have been staying at the settlement in tents and studying at its yeshiva for some 15 years, despite being ordered to vacate in 2005. The evacuation under especially tense conditions, however, as it's the scene of last month's shooting terror attack in which 25-year-old yeshiva student Yehuda Dementman was killed. Additionally, members of the Israeli Knesset opposition stoking the fires, Likud party officials and other right-wing delegates standing in solidarity with Homesh, calling for the settlement's legalization. And the Israeli Arab-led Joint List Party, in the meantime, uniting behind the Palestinian residents of Beitah and other nearby villages who've been restricted from lands atop which illegal Israeli settlements have sprung. So here to discuss is spokesperson for the Jewish community of Hebron, Yishai Fleisher. Yishai, thank you so much for joining us
Aaron,
today.
How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for joining us today. Hoping you're well as well. Why are we seeing this persistent attempt to resettle Homesh?
Homesh was evacuated or evicted in 2005 by Ariel Sharon. At the time, Ariel Sharon went to elections, and he beat Amram Mitzna, who had basically a disengagement plan. And Arik Sharon came in as a nationalist leader. Nationalists, I'm defining here, as Jews that want to settle, quote unquote, or live in Judea and Samaria, the Jewish heartland of the land of Israel. And Sharon turned around. He changed his colors completely, maybe under pressure by George W. Bush. But the point is that the disengagement took place is against the will of the Israeli people. This was also after, I forgot to mention, the Likud took a kind of national vote, and people around the country, Likud members said, yeah, we are totally against this. So I think what people feel on the ground is that the 2005 disengagement was a mistake, and it was also against the will of the people, undemocratic, and really not good for the future of the Jewish people in the land of Israel, in that the jihad takes over where the Jewish people are found, especially a place like Homesh, which is strategic for security and for history and for Jewish presence in the land of Israel. And so therefore there's an attempt to come back. This government seems to be on the side of disengagement. And you see that the jihadists are trying to help that out by murdering the Yehuda Dimitman, Rabbi Yehuda Dimitman. And you would think that the Israeli government would say, hey, we can't allow that kind of atmosphere around here. We better actually secure this Jewish presence in northern Samaria. But that's not what we're seeing. And so you're seeing some tension. But that yeshiva and that presence is strong. There are 20 students, full-time students there living there, 4 families. And 15,000 people came and protested for the rights of Jews to live in these places, in this place specifically. And you're going to keep seeing Jews hanging on strong to Judea and Samaria.
All right. So, I want to ask, because we've mentioned, of course, the murder of Yehuda Dimentman and the reaction after that death galvanized calls to establish and legalize the settlement, almost as a consequence of his death. Should the government establish something more permanent as a proper response to the murder of Yehuda Dimentman? Because how is Dimentman's death, while tragic, offset by establishing an outpost that was ordered to close 15 years ago?
Right. It's a good question, and that's a question that actually goes back to Zionist policy for almost the last 100 years. After a terror incident, usually the state of Israel or the nascent state of Israel made efforts to show that it won't be bullied, and the response was a Zionist response, which is to build and to settle and to grow the families and to naturalize and normalize. But I think that your question is also reasonable in the sense that we should be living in these places not as an answer to a murder, but because this is the central heartland of our peoplehood, and this is where Jewish history took place. This is where the Bible happened, and this is what's needed for today's security. If we don't control these areas, then northern Samaria will be filled with Hamas rockets. By the way, this is a sticker that I found in Jerusalem, very close to the Western Wall. This is a Hamas sticker, and they're saying we'll take over the eastern Jerusalem and we'll shoot these rockets at the rest of Israel. So that's what we saw happen from Gaza, and that's what we're going to see happen, God forbid, from northern Samaria. So it's not an answer to a murder. It's the answer that we've been looking for 2,000 years. But it happens to be that sometimes when somebody's murdered, the blood calls from the ground, and it says take a step, take an action, wake up, and there's a groundswell. And the government, which is supposed to represent the people, should respond in kind, which is to normalize Jewish life in northern Samaria.
All right. Yishai Fleisher, thank you so much for joining us.
Aaron, thank you.
ILTV Plus, your news from Israel and more 24/7. Start your free trial today. Subscribe at ILTV.tv and watch from any device.